If you had to survive 23 of Jigsaw's deadliest traps, what would you do? From reverse bear traps to needle pits, nerve gas, and everything in between. You've never seen more creative ways to die. Get ready to take a dive into one of the most twisted horror franchises of all time. Because we're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat all of the death traps in Saw Part 1, 2, and 3. These ungrateful victims are about to have a whole new appreciation for what it means to be alive. From the moment that he wakes up at the bottom of a tub in some dark and dingy looking bathroom, it's pretty obvious to Adam here that he's in just a little bit of trouble. As he scrambles to get his bearings, another voice starts speaking to him from out of the darkness. This is Dr. Lawrence Gordon, his new roommate for the next 8 hours. And he's just as confused about where they are as Adam is. They've both been chained to rusty pipes on opposite sides of a bathroom that seems like it could give you Ebola from just looking at it. But somehow, that's not even the worst part, because lying on the floor in the center of the room is a dead body. And he's holding a cassette player and a revolver. They're only 2 clues so far. Adam here does the only logical thing that you can do in a situation like this and starts to absolutely lose his shit. But it isn't long before he realizes that it's not getting him anywhere, and decides to start pulling on the chain instead. Obviously, that strategy doesn't work out either, so Lawrence suggests trying to remember how they got there, but neither one of them can recall a single detail about the attack. Looking around the room, he quickly notices that there's only one thing not covered in filth. A brand new clock up on the wall, so whoever did this clearly wants them to know the time. While Lawrence tries the door, Adam checks his pockets, and that's when he makes a game-changing discovery. He's been given an envelope with his name on it, containing a small cassette tape that says "Play Me." Lawrence got an envelope too, but his is even more interesting. Because besides just a tape, there's also a single 357 Magnum cartridge and a small key hidden inside. They try the key first, but it doesn't seem to work on any of their locks, causing Adam to chunk it down to the floor in a fit of gamer rage. Instead, he decides to go for the tape recorder being held by the dead guy, and although it's sitting far out of his reach, he's able to pull it over after several attempts by using his shirt and the bathtub plug to reel it in. Adam plays his tape first, but instead of answers, all that he hears is some crazy guy with a creepy voice roasting him for his poor life decisions. Tensions are already high, but things get even worse when they listen to Lawrence's tape. The same voice wants him to kill Adam before 6 o'clock. Otherwise, his wife Allison and daughter Diana will die instead. They're given one more clue. X marks the spot, and with that, the voice says that the time for their game has begun. Okay, man, talk about a rude wake-up call. On one end, we've got Lawrence, who's calm, collected, and trying to keep things under control. And then there's Adam, who decided to take the immediately start screaming like a 6-year-old girl approach. I'm not gonna lie, I'd be freaking out too, but it seems like there are a few obvious options that these two could try if they just slow down for just 1 second and think things through. First things first, we need to start by carefully checking every inch of the room that we can for any hidden tools or clues that might help us escape, especially the X marking the spot that Jigsaw mentioned at the end of Lawrence's tape. It'd be better to work together with the other guy for now, since we're both in the same situation, but we don't want to get too comfortable either, because there might be a time when things take a turn for the worse and we need to make some tough decisions. Plus, for all that either of them knows right now, the guy standing across from you could be the one that brought you in there in the first place. So we need to be careful who to trust. After getting our bearings, the next step is to start attacking the problems one at a time in an organized and strategic way. Before we can go anywhere, we'll need to get out of the chains first. But instead of focusing on the chains themselves, I would pay more attention to the locks and rusty pipes that they're attached to. Those types of padlocks can be easily broken just by applying enough force. So I'd look around for anything nearby that I could use as an improvised tool, and try to either smash them open the old-fashioned way or pick the lock if we wanted to try that approach. Now, my guy Lawrence here is great at coming up with ideas when he's busy bossing Adam around. But where's that same brain power when it comes to himself? There's an obvious solution staring at him right in the face here. If Adam could reach the tape player, then why doesn't Lawrence try to reach the revolver next? I would try to tear some of those thinner pipes off of the wall behind him to give him some extra reach. Or just taking the same approach as Adam and using some of my clothes or belt tied together, which should work fine, especially if I find something heavy nearby to add some weight to it. If he could get his hands on that weapon, then that would open up all kinds of possibilities. He could shoot out the lock or just kill Adam and call it a day. Although it might be better to leave him alive for now, just in case he needs a meat shield later on. In the meantime, I'd also take turns just shouting for help as loud as we could. It might seem silly, yeah, but it literally couldn't hurt to try. On the bright side, at least they have 8 whole hours to figure it out, which is way more than some of Jigsaw's other victims are going to get. So, when you look at it that way, they're actually kind of lucky for how this game was set up. The situation in the room is awkward to say the least, but Lawrence here noticed something about his tape that makes him think twice. Playing it back, he's able to make out the words, "Follow your heart," whispered quietly at the end of the message. And sure enough, there's a heart traced in poo-poo right there on the front of the toilet tank. It's up to Adam to reach on in there and start searching. But after digging around for a minute in the most disgusting water imaginable, these two geniuses suddenly realize that they might want to check underneath the lid. There we go. A black trash bag containing 2 rusty hacksaws. Not exactly what you'd call a Christmas present, but at least they're getting somewhere. Their first instinct is to start working away at their chains, but the saws are too weak to make even a scratch in the thick metal no matter how hard they try. Adam here goes so hard that he ends up completely breaking his, and chunks it across the room where it shatters off a corner of the mirror. As for Lawrence, he decides that he better stop before he breaks his saw too, and that's when he suddenly understands the terrifying truth. The saws weren't meant for them to cut through the chain at all. No. They were meant for cutting off their own feet. Putting the pieces together, he realizes that they must have been taken hostage by a notorious criminal who's still on the loose. And he knows this because Lawrence himself was once a suspect in the case. 5 months ago, a team of detectives began to uncover a series of grisly death traps, including one where a man was forced to crawl through a maze of barbed wire and killed in the process. At every crime scene, they'd always find the same 2 things: a cassette tape with a message for the victim, and a jigsaw puzzle piece cut out of their skin. Although the news started calling him the Jigsaw Killer, the truth is that he's never technically killed anybody. Instead, he forces his victims to play by the rules of his deadly games, offering them a slim chance to survive if they somehow complete the challenge, as a way to teach them a new appreciation for their wasted lives. Okay. This guy is seriously like the worst therapist ever. I mean, I get the point that he's trying to make, but there's gotta be a better way to teach people a lesson than forcing them to compete in the most complicated death traps that the world has ever seen. Am I right or am I right? Anyway, Lawrence here just made an absolutely terrifying observation. He seems to think that the hacksaws were meant for them to cut off their own feet. And while I can see how this would technically get them out of their current predicament, I can't say that it's definitely the best idea for several reasons. Going through with something like that already sounds bad enough, but the reality of the situation would be worse than I think any of us could even imagine. Besides the obvious, excruciating pain that you're going to be facing, severe blood loss, and the risk of even going into shock, you might not think that losing a foot would seem all that bad compared to spending the rest of your life in this horrific-ass Ebola dungeon. Your feet actually contain several major arteries, which means that you could bleed out in minutes if you were able to actually get all the way through. The rapid blood loss and extreme pain could also cause you to go into shock and lose consciousness, which is the last thing that you would want to happen when every second means the difference between life and death. Follow me. Hypothetically, if they were going to try it, there are some strategies that Lawrence and Adam could use to increase their chances of survival. They're going to want to choose a spot as close to the ankle as possible, since the bones there are thinner and easier to cut through. God damn, just thinking about it. Before starting, it would be crucial to apply a tourniquet as tightly as possible just above the cut point to minimize the blood flow. Using a shirt or belt should do the trick. The key would be to try and do it as quickly as possible. You know, like ripping off a band-aid, except 100 1,000 times worse. Once it was all said and done, they'd need to immediately apply pressure to the wound and get medical attention as fast as they possibly can, since even if they were lucky to survive the first 5 minutes, they'd still only have about 2 hours at the most before things really started to go downhill. Trust me, I've been watching this movie on DVD since 2004. I've thought about it a lot, you know? With that being said, going footless definitely isn't the best strategy. Instead, I'd try something obvious that they're both overlooking, and just use that saw on the locks or the rusty pipe. Those should both be much easier to get through than the thick steel chain. And even thin pieces from Adam's broken saw could be used to try and pick the locks or somehow pry them open. We also can't let all of this craziness distract us from keeping an eye on the other guy in the room. If Lawrence had been paying attention, then he would have noticed that Adam here clearly found something else besides just the 2 hacksaws in the bag, and deliberately hid it from him in the bathtub where he can't see. Whether you choose to call him out on it right away or not is a different story, but you need to be paying enough attention to notice something like that if you're going to make it out of here in one piece. At some point during their investigation, the detectives come across another test chamber, this one built for an insurance scammer named Mark. As a way to teach him a lesson, Jigsaw poisoned the man and brought him to a basement where he'd stashed the only antidote in a locked safe at the center of the room. His only chance for survival was to find the combination hidden somewhere in the hundreds of numbers painted all over the walls. But every inch of the floor was covered in broken glass, and Mark himself had been covered in a flammable liquid, making his only source of light, a small candle with an open flame, also his greatest danger. Needless to say, Mark here didn't make it, but the crime scene gave the detectives some interesting leads. For one, a peephole cut out of the wall told them that Jigsaw here likes to watch his games play out live and in person. But what was even more interesting was the pen that they found belonging to none other than our good old buddy Dr. Lawrence Gordon. Lawrence himself was busy giving some interns the rundown on his patient John Kramer, who was there receiving treatment for an inoperable brain tumor, when he was called over to the intercom to come to his office right away. To his surprise, he found city detectives David Tapp and Stephen Singh already there waiting for him, and they immediately started grilling him about his alibi from the night before. Although he wasn't exactly innocent himself, Lawrence knew that he hadn't committed any crimes. But when the detectives showed him that they found his pen at the latest Jigsaw scene, he had no choice but to follow them down to the station for questioning. Without saying too much, Lawrence admitted to his lawyer that it couldn't have been him, because the truth is that he was seeing someone that night who he didn't want his wife finding out about. The lawyer suggested that he might as well have come clean, and after confirming his alibi, Lawrence was cleared of any suspicion for the time. But before he could leave, the detectives wanted him to listen to the story of a Jigsaw survivor who they'd just brought in, saying that it might help him remember any leads. In the next room over, they brought in a young woman named Amanda, the only person to have survived a Jigsaw trap so far. Nervous, she began to recall a story of how she was taken in by the maniac, and woke up restrained to a chair with a horrifying contraption already strapped to her face. After struggling for a moment without any luck, a television on the other side of the room suddenly turned on, showing a video of a sinister-looking puppet that Jigsaw used to explain the rules of her game. He called this one the reverse bear trap, and when the timer ran out, the device would split Amanda's head in half from her jaw up, killing her instantly. Her only hope of escape was to find the key hidden in the stomach of a dead body in the corner of the room. As soon as she stood up, the timer on Amanda's mask activated, leaving her with only 60 seconds to complete the challenge or die trying. Panicking, she grabbed a scalpel from the floor, only to realize that the dead man was very much still alive, just paralyzed with medication. But by then, it was already too late, and she had no choice but to cut the key out of his stomach, killing the man in the process. Luckily for her at least, Amanda was able to unlock the device and save herself just in time, receiving a congratulations from the puppet, who rode in on a squeaky old tricycle, for having what it took to survive. The craziest part of all is that Amanda here was actually grateful to Jigsaw for what happened, saying that he helped her kick the addiction that would have eventually gotten her if she hadn't quit. Okay, this chick is seriously f***ed up, but I've got to give her some credit. She did the damn thing and made it out with her face still intact, which is more than any of Jigsaw's other victims can say so far. We're going to be seeing a lot more of Amanda here in later parts of the story, but for now, this gives us a great opportunity to point out something important. Thanks to Amanda, we've just had a first-hand demonstration on the #1 rule for surviving Jigsaw's death traps. The key here is to never under any circumstances start flailing around and freaking out before you've had a chance to carefully get a grasp of the entire situation. In this case, the timer on Amanda's trap wasn't activated until she stood up out of her chair and pulled the pin. Now, if she'd realized this before the timer was actually started, then it would have given her the option of examining the entire setup and trying to figure out a way to beat it without ever even activating the trap in the first place. After getting her hands free, she could have spent some time investigating the device itself and seeing if there was some way that she could damage, deactivate, or jam one of its crucial components, like the trigger pin, the timer, or the clasps holding it onto her head. Jigsaw is a pretty smart guy, so odds are good that there won't be any obvious weaknesses in the design for her to exploit. But giving yourself the time to at least try is much better than starting the timer and only having 60 seconds to figure it out before your head explodes. Plus, she could always just sit right there in that spot for the next 3 days or so before she eventually dies of dehydration, and just hope that some help happens to come her way before she has to handle the situation on her own. Once the timer started, she really didn't have any other options besides following through with the rules of the game the way that Jigsaw had set it up. That'd be easy enough if it really was just a dead body that you had to deal with, but realizing that the guy was alive completely changed everything. And it may have not been the most ethical decision, but you've gotta at least respect the fact that Amanda did what she had to do. Now it's off to the needle pit with her. I'm looking at you, Saw Part 2. But as for Lawrence and Adam, they've still got a long way to go. Hearing all of this from Lawrence makes Adam kinda paranoid, but when he grabs a piece of broken glass to threaten him, he notices something strange. One side of the glass is see-through, meaning that it's actually a one-way mirror, and after smashing the rest of it with some junk that he finds on the floor, they realize that someone has been watching them on a camera all along. Taking everything in, the two of them finally begin to understand that every part of this nightmare was precisely calculated in advance by Jigsaw. Adam questions how the doctor here can stay so composed when his wife and daughter could be in danger, but he says that protecting them is exactly why he's so determined to escape. To prove that he's telling the truth, Lawrence throws him his wallet full of pictures of his family, but as he's looking through them, Adam here makes a disturbing discovery. Hidden inside is a photo of Allison and Diana all tied up. With regards, from Jigsaw himself. On the reverse side is another message, reading, "Sometimes you see more with your eyes shut." Throwing the wallet back over to Lawrence, he decides to keep the picture a secret for now while he tries to figure out what the message could mean. On the night before, Lawrence left home for what he said was a late-night work call, but that was his biggest mistake. As soon as he was gone, someone kidnapped his wife and daughter, and now the man has them both tied up in their own apartment. But when he gets up to check outside of the window, he has no idea that there's someone else watching them from across the street, who Jigsaw doesn't even know about. After finishing up with Lawrence, Detective Tapp spent the rest of the night watching Amanda's tape over and over again until he finally found what he was looking for. For one brief shot, he could make out a particular graffiti tag on the wall behind the puppet, as well as the faint sound of a fire alarm going off somewhere in the background. This allowed Tapp and his partner Singh to narrow the location down to an abandoned mannequin factory across town. So they set off to the location to see if they can find any leads, never suspecting that they were about to walk right into a death trap. With Tapp leading the way, the two detectives broke into the abandoned factory and were able to quickly find Jigsaw's makeshift workshop hidden up on the second floor of the building. Besides what they saw on the tape, the place was full of tiny models of Jigsaw's recent traps. But that's when they realized that they weren't alone. Pulling back one of the sheets, they were shocked to find this whole-ass guy hidden under there, strapped to some sort of contraption, with two power drills pointed straight at his neck, when all of a sudden, they heard the elevator coming up. And in walked Jigsaw himself just as the detectives took cover behind some nearby construction materials. From their hiding spot in the corner of the room, the detectives watched as Jigsaw approached the man in the trap, springing out to confront him when they thought that he'd let his guard down takedown, but before they could even react, Jigsaw kicked a button on the floor and activated the device, throwing the whole situation into complete chaos. Forced to make a choice between going after him or saving the victim, Singh jumped into action trying to deactivate the trap, while Tap held Jigsaw at gunpoint. With only seconds left before the man would be killed, Singh quickly drew his weapon and shot out the drills, saving his life. But while Tap was distracted, Jigsaw busted out a full-blown Assassin's Creed blade and slit his throat with one swift move, disappearing deeper into the factory before Singh could catch him. Somehow, Tap here managed to survive the attack, and handed Singh the shotty, telling him to go after Jigsaw instead, the chase leading him down into the tunnels below the building where death could be waiting for him around any corner. In one of the hallways, Singh drew down on Jigsaw and fired a blast straight into his back, dropping him to the floor. But as he moved in to investigate, he accidentally activated a tripwire that automatically fired several shotguns down at him from above. By the time that Tap could get to him, Jigsaw had already escaped, his body armor having saved him from the fatal shot, leaving Tap here completely obsessed with finding the madman and stopping him once and for all. Okay, well fellas, I gotta say that I don't think that could have gone any worse if you tried. It's almost like that you forgot that you were going after the most deranged, calculating criminal genius that you've ever encountered in your entire careers, and you just decided to treat it like your first day on the job instead. Knowing his MO, you would have thought that they would have been just a little bit more careful about their approach, but now we've got one detective down, Jigsaw still on the loose, and there's really only one person to blame for this entire debacle. Detective Tap, you, sir, have majorly f***ed up. Alright, bud, since you're clearly struggling here, let me sit you down for a little Jigsaw 101. This guy loves his traps, clearly, so if you're going after him in his own workshop, it might be a good idea to expect the unexpected. Just a suggestion. Honestly, you two are even lucky enough that you made it through the front door without being killed, considering you just kicked it in without even checking. But I guess that luck doesn't hold up forever now, huh? As a matter of fact, let's talk about my boy Singh for a minute, because what just happened to him was wrong. So wrong, on so many levels. Tap here may have up, but poor Singh was the one who really got done dirty. You want to know what this guy's plans for the night were? He was heading down to the bar with his buddies from work to get a beer and a burger and then going home to be with his wife and kids. But instead, he got roped into an illegal search by this Jigsaw-obsessed maniac and ended up paying the ultimate price. At least he was being more careful, but even that still wasn't enough. And I guess that's just the risk you take when you're dealing with a guy who isn't a killer, but set up a vertical shotgun booby trap for anyone who tries to trespass in his workshop. Seriously, 4 shotguns on a tripwire, but he's not a killer? Yeah, okay. Here I was thinking that Jigsaw's victims were only supposed to be bad people. Singh here did absolutely nothing to deserve this besides just doing his job. And he didn't even get any warning or anything. Just straight up taken out in the most horrific way imaginable so that his family can't even give him a nice funeral. That's just diabolical, Jigsaw, even for you. And as for Tap, don't think I forgot about you. What? Did you forget your handcuffs at home or something? First of all, you jumped out at the worst possible time, and by waiting until he was right next to the hostage, you gave him the perfect opportunity to pull one of the classic Jigsaw tricks. Your partner Singh did his part and saved a man's life, even though you were the one who dragged him into this death trap in the first place. But even then, you still couldn't keep up your own end of the deal. All that you had to do was cuff him and it would have been case closed. But you literally just sat there dumbfounded until you got straight up Ezio'd with the hidden blade. Assassin's Creed reference. And all I can say to that is, damn. I guess Jigsaw had that throat slash precisely lined up to leave Tap over there looking like he's clinging to your life, but not actually in danger of dying, you know, since he's definitely not a killer and all that. The worst part about this whole disgrace was that they could have ended Jigsaw's entire career right here and now if they just made better decisions. With some backup, proper gear, and a solid plan, this could have gone in a completely different direction. But Tap, being in such a rush, led them to blowing it when they had their best chance of stopping him yet. And his partner was the one who ended up having to suffer the consequences. You're a bad detective, Tap. Go home. But you're an even worse friend, and that is why you up. Tensions continue to escalate back in the bathroom, where Lawrence is getting more and more frustrated with Adam's cagey behavior. But something that the doctor says suddenly gives him an idea. Adam here tells his roommate to try turning off the lights, and that's when they realize that X has been right behind him the whole time, marked on the wall with glow-in-the-dark paint. Using the handle of his saw, Lawrence busts out the section of the wall and finds a small metal box hidden inside. It's locked, of course, but they're able to open it using the key that came with his envelope way back in the beginning, and inside they find several interesting items. There's a cell phone, a lighter, 2 cigarettes, and a note addressed to Lawrence, reminding him that there's more than one way to kill his opponent. Lawrence's first instinct is to try to call the cops, but he quickly realizes that the phone is only set up for receiving calls, not placing them. The sound of the busy signal suddenly triggers a memory of how he had been trying to leave a shady-looking parking garage the night before, only to be violently attacked and kidnapped by a figure wearing a red cloak and a pig's head mask, which finally explains how he ended up here. Getting suspicious, Lawrence demands to know how Adam here came up with the idea to turn off the lights, and after arguing about it for a minute, he finally decides to show him the picture that he found in his wallet. The doctor is completely heartbroken by what he sees, but this doesn't change the fact that his only way to save them is to finish the game, and now that he has proof that they're really in danger, he's starting to consider all of his options, including taking Adam out. Thinking it over, he remembers that the dead man in the room with them supposedly had poison in his blood and secretly dips one of the cigarettes into it while Adam here is distracted. For a moment, it seems like he's planning on killing the man to win his own freedom, but he's not actually ready to turn on him just yet. Instead, he shuts off the lights so that Jigsaw can't see them and quietly fills Adam in on the plan, telling him to play along. Turning the lights back on, he tosses Adam the safe cigarette, and he immediately starts pretending to choke on the poison in hopes of tricking Jigsaw. It's an Oscar-worthy performance, but the kidnapper calls their bluff by shocking Adam with a jolt of electricity through the shackle around his ankle, proving that he's actually still alive. Desperate to escape, Lawrence goes back to madly sawing at the chain, but it's no use, and he tosses the saw away out of frustration. At the same time, the jolt of electricity must have jogged Adam's memory, because now he says that he can remember how he ended up there. On the same night that Lawrence was taken, Adam here was back at his rundown apartment developing secret photos of the doctor himself, and fell asleep at his desk only to wake up in pitch darkness with the power seeming like it'd been cut. Just then, he heard what sounded like someone else in the apartment with him and started using the flash from his camera to look for the source of the noise. As he made his way into the kitchen, he was jump scared by Jigsaw's puppet sitting in one of the chairs and gave the little creep a much needed beatdown with a baseball bat, but he wasn't safe yet. Hearing a noise from the closet, he slowly pulled open the door using a camera flash to light up the inside, and that's when the same pig-masked attacker jumped out of the shadows, knocking him out and dragging him off to play the game. Okay, I swear, the more that I find out about these people, the dumber that I realize that they are. This could be up there in the How to Beat Hall of Shame for one of the most easily avoidable abductions that I've ever witnessed. And when you look at how bad the consequences were for this screw up, it only makes it so much worse. Adam, my boy, old buddy, old pal, I'm just gonna say something here that might sound crazy to you, but I really want you to listen up and hear me out. If you think that there's an intruder hiding in your closet when you have a clear shot to the fucking front door, just leave. It's not like you had a wife and kids in the next room that you had to protect. The door was right there. So what the hell are we even doing still standing around in your kitchen in the dark? The instant that I saw that Jigsaw puppet sitting on my couch, I would have been halfway around the planet like Barry Allen so fast that the kidnapper would not have even been sure if anyone ever lived there to begin with. There's this little thing called fight or flight response that's been keeping us alive for millions of years, but it doesn't seem like you got either one, and maybe you just weren't meant to survive in the same universe as a guy like Jigsaw after all. At the very least, he could have bunkered up somewhere in a defensible position and used some furniture to block himself in. Then all he would have had to do is yell for help and start swinging that bat around if they tried to get him. But even with a baseball bat and the home field advantage, he still somehow managed to lose the fight. That's just embarrassing. Adam here just provided a great example of exactly what not to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. And his survival instincts clearly haven't gotten any better since then. But maybe if he gets lucky, there's still a chance of him making it out of this bathroom alive. With only about 25 minutes left on the clock, the phone starts to ring as Lawrence receives a call from his wife and daughter. He hears Diana on the other end when he answers, who tells him that the man from her room has them, before handing the phone over to her mother. When it's Allison's turn, she tells him not to trust Adam in a way that sounds suspiciously like she's reading it from a script, but the kidnapper abruptly hangs up before he can ask any more questions. At this point, Lawrence here is officially ready to crash out, and starts demanding that Adam tells him who he really is. Finally, Adam agrees to come clean, but he's not the only one with something to hide. While his family thought that he was at work, Lawrence here was secretly at a motel having a sneaky link with his secretary. Although he and the woman didn't actually do anything, they received a mysterious phone call as he was about to leave, threatening to expose him. And Lawrence left the place in such a hurry that he didn't even notice Adam taking pictures of him as he walked back to his car. It turns out that Adam here had been hired by a man named Bob to get the photos, but he swears that he doesn't know anything else about the doctor's personal life. It isn't until he starts to describe the man that Jigsaw realizes Bob is actually Detective Tapp, still hell-bent on solving the Jigsaw case as a way to avenge his fallen partner, and convinced that the doctor here had something to do with it. He's absolutely furious with Adam for essentially stalking him, but what Adam points out is that he was just capturing the truth, saying that Lawrence has no one to blame for what happened other than himself. The bag containing the hacksaws was also full of pictures that Adam had been keeping a secret until now, but as they're looking them over, they realize that there are a couple of photos in there of Lawrence's apartment that were definitely taken by somebody else. And in one of them, they can clearly make out a man named Zepp, who works as an orderly at the hospital, standing in his bedroom window, proving that he's the one who kidnapped Allison and Diana. It's a little too late though, because that's when the clock reaches 6, and now it's time for the final part of Jigsaw's game to begin. Back at their apartment, Allison manages to get her gag loose while the kidnapper is distracted. Speaking to her daughter, she reassures the girl that everything is going to be alright, and starts working at her hand restraints in an attempt to get herself free. Just as she finally does it, Zepp here comes back into the room and forces her to call her husband one last time, never realizing that she's no longer tied up. She plays along for a moment, but the second that she sees an opportunity, Allison leaps into action and tackles Zepp to the floor, wrestling his weapon away as she orders him not to move. Grabbing the phone, she tries to explain the situation to her husband, but as soon as she lets her guard down, Zepp jumps back up and starts trying to subdue her once again, with the two of them firing several shots into the walls of the apartment as they battle it out. Okay, you have got to be kidding me. I seriously just can't deal with these people anymore. Let me take a deep breath before I say something that I might regret. All right, now that I'm cooled off, let's just take a second to talk about the absolute show that we just witnessed here. I think Allison might be giving Adam a run for his money when it comes to some of the worst survival skills that I've ever seen. Here's an idea. If the guy who you just escaped from is inching closer and closer to you, even though you're pointing the blicky straight at his face, just take the damn shot, please. Blast this creep back to Timbuktu and do the whole world a favor before exactly what just happened ends up happening. The only thing worse than getting kidnapped once is getting kidnapped twice by the same guy when he didn't even have a weapon the second time around. No weapon the second time around. Like that, the She even had a phone in her hand that she could have used to, I don't know, maybe call 12. It's not like Lawrence was in any position to help her, so it doesn't make any sense to waste time telling him to hold on when you should be calling for help. She had the whole situation under control, but somehow, she still managed to blow it. We need to move on before I genuinely lose it, but at this point, whatever happens, happens. Good luck, idiots. You're clearly gonna need it. The commotion across the street attracts the attention of Detective Tapp, who goes charging over there with his own weapon to join the shootout. Just as Allison manages to stab Zepp in the leg with a pair of scissors, Tapp over here knocks on the door waving the 4-4 and just starts blasting with absolutely no regard for the innocent woman and child who are caught in the crossfire. All that Lawrence can do is listen as his apartment pops off like the 4th of July, but thankfully, Allison and Diana are able to make a quick escape escape as Tap runs out of ammo and charges across the room, spear tackling Zepp to the floor. After a brief scuffle, Zepp manages to stun Tap with a glass vase to the back of the head, and quickly takes off out of there to go kill Lawrence, leaving the others safe for now. Just then, Lawrence is struck by what seems like a lethal jolt of electricity, but it's only enough to temporarily knock him out. Meanwhile, Zepp speeds over to the building with Tap in close pursuit, and the two of them start popping off shots at each other in the tunnels as he scrambles to get to the bathroom and finish the job. The phone starts to ring again as Allison tries to call to tell him that they're all right, but it's sitting just out of Lawrence's reach. And he gets so frustrated with the whole situation that he decides that it's time to do something drastic. In a frenzy, Lawrence tears off his shirt and wraps it around his leg like a tourniquet before laying into his own leg with the hacksaw in a desperate play to set himself free. Tap finally catches up with the kidnapper and starts giving him a brutal beatdown. But during the struggle, Zepp drops down and fires a shot behind his back, killing the detective just when he was finally about to crack the case. In the bathroom, Lawrence finally manages to saw through his entire leg before dragging himself over to the revolver on the floor and loading in his single cartridge. Even though he begs him not to do it, Lawrence raises the weapon and reluctantly fires a shot into Adam's chest, killing him in the hopes that Jigsaw will set his family free. Okay, and this right here officially confirms that Lawrence is an absolute moron, the likes of which the world has never seen. He could have easily used the same saw that he just cut his own foot off with to reach the damn phone if he would have just tried even 1% harder. Then he would have known that his family was safe, and all of this bloodshed could have been avoided. Instead, he just maimed himself forever, killed a guy, and still doesn't even know if his family is okay. He did have some nice form when it came to the amputation though, and you could really see those surgeon skills coming through, so I'll give him credit for that at least. But brother, that was easily one of the most brain-dead decisions that I've ever seen. And you're about to find out that you did it all for nothing. What Lawrence here fails to realize is that his family is already safe and sound, but as for him, he's slowly bleeding out on the floor of this disgusting bathroom. And that's when Zepp comes crashing in to finish him off. Even though he technically killed Adam like he was told, he did it a few minutes too late, which means that according to the rules of the game, he still has to die. All of a sudden, Adam here proves that he's not dead by sweeping Zepp's leg and brutally beating him to death with the lid of the toilet tank, saving both of their lives just in time. The shot only hits his shoulder, leaving him injured but still alive, and Lawrence crawls out of the room promising to bring back help. But if they think that their game is over, then they're in for a terrifying surprise. Digging through the man's pockets, Adam finds another cassette player meant for Zepp, proving that he was only another pawn in Jigsaw's game. Remember that dead body that's been in there the whole time? It's at this moment that he suddenly gets up from the ground, peeling off the fake wound that he's been wearing and revealing his true identity. John Kramer, the cancer patient from Lawrence's hospital, or as he's known in the streets, the real Jigsaw. As Adam realizes that he's just been played like a fiddle, Jigsaw tells him that the key to his chain went down the drain of the bathtub when he first woke up in it 8 hours ago. After stunning Adam with another jolt of electricity, Jigsaw turns out the lights and closes the door, leaving him to die alone in the darkness. The game might be over for Adam, but as for John, his games are just getting started. If you were trapped in a run-down house with no way to escape and only 2 hours to live, what would you do? These unsuspecting criminals are about to end up the next victims in a madman's death game, and they're going to have to do whatever it takes if they want to make it out alive. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the return of Jigsaw in Saw 2. This detective is going to learn the hard way what happens when you try to hide from the mistakes of your past, suddenly waking up after being knocked unconscious. This guy, Michael, finds himself locked in a dingy room with nothing but some bright lights, a TV, and a mirror around him. Looking at his reflection, he realizes that his left eye seems badly damaged. But what's even more horrifying is that his head is trapped inside of a steel, mask-like contraption filled with giant metal spikes. Just then, the TV turns on, and Billy the Jigsaw puppet appears on the screen, telling Michael that he wants to play a game. Because the man makes his living spying on others, Jigsaw tells him that he'll have to sacrifice the part of his body that he relies on the most if he wants to survive. The death mask is on a timer, and if he doesn't find the key in time, then it will snap shut, brutally killing him. After showing Michael footage of him on an operating table to prove that the key is really hidden inside of his body, he gives him one final hint, flashing x-rays of the key behind his eyeball and telling him that it's right before his eyes. Terrified, Michael lunges for a toolbox across the room, accidentally pulling a pin out of the trap and activating the timer. Inside, he finds a surgeon's scalpel and starts psyching himself up to perform the operation. Although he comes close to doing it, in the end, he's too afraid, tossing the blade across the room and falling to his knees as he screams out for help. That's when the timer runs out and the trap snaps shut, killing him. That makes one victim down, with 9 more to go. Okay, talk about a splitting headache. This is an absolute nightmare scenario, but what could Michael here have done differently if he wanted to survive? The first step with any jigsaw trap is to carefully observe your surroundings. Looking around the room, we can see that the wire to activate the trap is attached to a small pulley on the wall nearby. Although he was definitely in a bad position, the danger didn't become immediate until he went for the toolbox, pulling on the wire and causing the timer to start counting down. This means that technically, as long as he avoided pulling out the pin, he'd have about 3 days to think of what to do next, or even just sit there and hope that someone would eventually come to help before he eventually started to die from dehydration. Now, instead of pulling away from the wall, what Michael actually needed to do here was go towards it and see if he could find some way to unhook or damage the pulley without ever activating the trap at all. He could search around the room for any improvised tools, like a loose pipe to break it, or a thin piece of metal to pry it off of the wall, just as long as he made sure to stay within a safe radius that didn't trigger the timer. It also might have been worth trying to stop the mask from working the way that Jigsaw had intended altogether, either by finding some way to damage the padlocks, or leather straps that are holding it onto his body, or by jamming something into the mechanism to prevent it from snapping shut like a pipe, or parts of the chair that he was first sitting on. Of course, once the trap was activated, with so little time left and guaranteed death waiting for him if he failed, the safest bet of all would have been to just complete the challenge and cut out his eye to get the key. It's going to be the hardest thing that he's ever done. But when the other option is getting his head crushed in a death mask, he has to be willing to make the sacrifice to get out alive. If he was lucky enough to survive, then he'd quickly want to find something to pack the hole and stop the bleeding, and get some medical attention as soon as possible, so that the wound wouldn't become infected. Good luck getting it done in time though. With only 1 minute on the clock, he's got less time to do all of that than you're supposed to just spend brushing your teeth in the morning. So even if he actually had the stomach to do what needed to be done, the odds of surviving this one are unfortunately slim to none. Later, Detective Eric Matthews goes to pick up his son, Daniel, who's in trouble for attempting to steal from an electronics store. Eric warns him that they're going to press charges and starts giving his son a hard time for acting out. Upset, the kid says that he'd rather go stay with his mom instead, so the detective shouts at him to just leave if that's what he wants. The next day, Eric gets a call from his sergeant asking him to come down and check out the crime scene of Michael's death. There, he meets with fellow investigator Detective Allison Carey, who tells him that the victim was identified as one of Eric's informants, but that they need him to confirm his identity. Although the man's face is completely destroyed, Eric is able to identify him from the tattoo on his ankle and notices a puzzle piece cut out of his shoulder, proving that he must have been one of Jigsaw's victims. Allison asks him if he can think of anyone who might be a suspect, adding that whoever it was must be very intelligent based on the complicated design of the trap. Unsure, he's just about to leave the room when she calls his attention to one final clue. On the ceiling above them, the killer left him a personal message. "Look closer, Detective Matthews." That night, Eric has nightmares about the crime scene and suddenly remembers noticing an important detail about the mask. The metal used to make it was manufactured at a nearby industrial plant called Wilson Steel. After calling down to the station, Eric and Allison quickly join up with a SWAT team and storm the building. The officer officers make their way inside, eventually coming to a staircase that's enclosed in a suspicious-looking metal cage. Cutting open the lock, they cautiously start moving up to the next floor, when suddenly, the lead officer activates a pressure plate trap, causing the puppet to come riding up on his tiny bike as a distraction. Just then, the door behind them slams shut, and when the officer presses forward, placing more of his weight on the stair, the next step shoots towards him and breaks his legs, sending him crashing into the two men behind him, who then fall back and are electrocuted by a current that's running through the cage. Pulling the men to safety, the rest of the team storms inside where they find Jigsaw's workshop, and sitting in a wheelchair at the end of the room is a sick-looking old man, John Kramer, the Jigsaw killer himself. The officers put the man in restraints and arrest him without incident, but just when Eric is about to leave, John tells him that he shouldn't go until he investigates a cage on the other side of the room. Searching inside, Eric pulls back a blanket and finds a set of screens that show a group of hostages, suddenly realizing that one of them is his son, Daniel. Eric rushes back over to John, demanding to know what he's doing with his son. That's when John reveals that the boy only has 2 hours to live before a poisonous gas that's pumping through the house slowly kills him. Eric wants to know where he is, but John cryptically responds that he's in a safe place. Furious, Eric goes back over to the monitors and borrows Allison's phone to call his son, only to hear Jigsaw on the kid's voicemail. Another officer notices a digital clock counting down the minutes that the victims have left to live, and calls for the bomb squad as Eric watches Daniel through the screen, trying to figure out a way to save him. Okay, it looks like this just got personal for Detective Matthews here. He's only got 2 hours to save his son's life, but has no idea where the boy even really is, so where should he start? One thing that we know about Jigsaw is that he likes for a part of his hints to be taken literally. For example, like when he told Michael that the key was right before his eyes. The detectives have the tape from Michael's death game, so if they're paying attention, then they should be aware of this trick. Knowing this, because he said that Daniel was in a safe place, I'd start by searching any place nearby that might have a safe to see if I could find the kid or some clues to his location. This could be some place like a bank or even somewhere that Eric has known criminals to use as a safe house during his police work. When they first walked in, there was actually a safe sitting right next to Jigsaw there. And it might seem too obvious, but if it were me, then that would have been the first place that I'd check. Besides that clue, they also have the security camera footage to go off of, but they might want to make sure that it's actually live first before taking it too seriously. I'd start by following the cables to see what the monitors were plugged into, and checking to see if there's anything about the setup that's suspicious in any way, since the worst thing to do right now would be to accidentally waste time focusing on a distraction. Finally, I'd want to check around Jigsaw's office for any more clues that could help me out. Remember, this is all a game to him, and the reality is that Jigsaw's too meticulous to make a convenient mistake, like leaving the location of his hideout right there on the death mask. The only reason that Eric figured out where to find him is because Jigsaw wanted him to. So there's a very good chance that there are more clues hidden around the building that could lead him to his son. At this point, Eric's best, and really his only option, is to keep playing along with the game and pay very careful attention to every detail of what the man says. Meanwhile, in the dilapidated house, the captives start to regain consciousness and begin trying to figure out what's happening. They quickly find out that the room is sealed with a huge metal door, and someone seems to be watching them through a system of closed-circuit cameras. Horrified, they realize that they've all been kidnapped and brought here for some unknown reason, and now their only option is to find a way to escape. Pressing her head against the door, this woman Addison tells the others that she can hear a strange ticking sound. Just then, another hostage named Amanda finally wakes up and immediately starts freaking out worse than anyone else. As Amanda tears the room apart, she eventually locates a few loose bricks along one of the walls and breaks them away until she finds a tape player. This guy Jonas comes to ask her what it is, and she explains that everything they need to know will be on the tape. After hitting play, everyone gathers around and listens as Jigsaw lays out the details of the trap. In 3 hours, the door to the house will open, setting them free. The only problem being that they have just 2 hours to live. There's a deadly nerve gas pumping through the building that they've been breathing in since they arrived, and the only way for any of them to survive is to find the antidote. Several syringes of the cure are hidden around the house, including one in the safe right in front of them. To open the lock, they'll have to figure out the combination, and Jigsaw gives them 2 hints. The numbers are in the back of their minds, and the clue for their order can be found just over the rainbow. Also, each of them has something in common that can help them better understand exactly why they've been chosen. And Jigsaw tells them to look carefully because for this clue, X marks the spot. Grabbing a piece of paper from a pile of rubble, this ex-convict Xavier discovers a small key, along with a note that straight up says do not try using it on the door. Amanda warns him to listen to what the note says, but he's determined to try it anyway. This guy Gus here decides to look through the peepholes. As soon as Xavier turns the key, he accidentally activates a revolver trap that fires straight into Gus's eye, killing him instantly. That makes 2 victims down, with 8 more to go. As everyone begins to panic, Jonas grabs Amanda and demands that she tells them what she knows, which is exactly when she reveals that they've all been captured by Jigsaw. She knows this because she has survived one of his games before, and says that they can all make it out as long as they're careful and follow the rules. Okay, these people need to act fast. It's a scary thought, but if Jigsaw trapped you in an escape room with deadly consequences, do you think that you'd survive? These contestants have all been poisoned, and they only have 2 hours left to live. They need to find a way out, or quickly get their hands on some of the antidote before it's too late. Since there's only 1 dose of the cure here, and it's locked in a safe, their biggest priority should be getting out. The only door is made of impenetrable steel, so while some of them search for a key or combination, the others need to look for weak points, like the windows or thin sections of the walls. Although the door is too tough to get through by force, they could try creating their own exit using any improvised tools that they find, which would get them into the rest of the house and open up more options to escape. They'll still have a long way to go, but if they take their time and follow the rules, then they just might stand a chance at survival. Amanda here seems to know what's going on better than anyone else, which is why if it were me, I'd be teaming up with her and carefully listening to her advice. She says that the most important thing is to play along with the game and follow the rules, so that's exactly what the others need to do. Remember, Jigsaw's clues almost always have a literal element to them. The first clue that he gave was that the numbers to the safe are in the back of their minds.
The numbers are in the back of your mind.
So, as gross as it is, they should use the dead guy as an opportunity to check to see if he meant that literally. The second clue was that the order for the numbers is hidden over the rainbow. While it's exactly hard to put together exactly what he means by that right now, the good news is that since they're stuck in this one room, they have a very limited area to work with. The answer must be in there somewhere, so they should work together to search the place up and down for anything that resembles a rainbow. Hopefully they'll end up finding something that will help them piece together the situation. They've all been pretty unlucky so far, but if there's one thing that they have going for them, it's that they're trapped in a room that has windows. The reinforcements on them look strong, but not impossible to get through. So while they're searching for a way out, at least a few of them should attack the windows to see if they can make any progress. Even if they can't create a hole big enough for a person to fit through, they might be able to expose a section of the glass, and then use one of the loose bricks that are laying around to shatter it, creating some ventilation and circulating the air, which should, at the very least, dilute the strength of the gas and help them live a few minutes longer. Back at the factory, Eric goes back over to John for more information, and the man explains that all he wants is a little bit of the detective's time. He wants to speak with him in private, promising that if he agrees, then he'll see his son again. Instead, the detective threatens to strong-arm the answers out of him, which is when John reveals that he's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, so there's nothing that Eric can do to put him in any more pain than he's already experiencing. Eric and the other officers discuss their options, and although the SWAT team leader thinks that they should take the old school approach, Allison finally convinces him to at least try speaking to John, if only to buy them a little more time. The hostages start tearing the room apart looking for any antidote syringes or clues, when suddenly the door to the room creaks open, and they realize that it was on a timer all along. Grabbing a broomstick, Xavier carefully pulls open the door the rest of the way before taking the key and stepping out into the hallway. After finding a spiked baseball bat, he tells the others that he's taking matters into his own hands to find some antidote and a way out. In the house's front room, they find a door labeled exit. Xavier crouches down off to the side and carefully tries the key, but it doesn't fit, so he throws it to the ground in frustration, and Jonas decides to pick it up. Meanwhile, Eric tells the others to clear the room and sits down with John to talk, which is when he reveals that he wants to play a game. The only rule is that Eric needs to stay and listen to what John has to say. If he succeeds, then he'll find his son in a safe and secure state. Back at the house, Xavier tries breaking through the wooden door with his bat, only to discover that the other side is reinforced with a heavy metal shutter. With the pressure of the situation building, the group begins to turn on each other, but Jonas manages to calm them down, mentioning that the tape said that they all have something in common, and saying that they should try to figure out what that is. Before he can finish his train of thought, this girl Laura finds an unlocked door leading down into the basement, and they decide to check it out. Xavier leads them in, with everyone else following closely behind. They see what looks like a person wearing a hood slumped over in a wheelchair and facing the corner. Xavier raises his bat, ready for a fight, but when Jonas pulls their head back, they realize that the person is already dead, and a knife pinning a note labeled Obi to their chest. Just then, one of the hostages who hasn't spoken yet says that the note must be for him. Inside, they find another cassette tape, and when they turn it on, Jigsaw tells Obi that he wants to play a game. According to the killer, there are 2 syringes of the antidote inside of the giant oven at the center of the room. That's when Jigsaw reveals that Obi helped him kidnap the others, saying that the first syringe is a gift for his work, and that it's up to him who gets the second. The only catch is that one of them will come with a price. And he adds one final hint, saying that once you're in hell, only the devil can help you out. Suddenly, Laura has a flashback, remembering that it was Obi who knocked her out and brought her there. He claims that he had no choice, but the others are completely furious at him for what he's done, with Xavier here grabbing the knife from the dead body and ordering Obi to go in the oven and get the syringes, or else he'll kill him on the spot. Cornered, he agrees to give it a try, on the condition that he gets to keep one of the needles for himself if he survives. Crawling headfirst into the oven, Obi spots the 2 syringes dangling on the other side and reaches out, safely pulling the first one down. After flipping over to get a better angle, he pulls down on the second syringe, but that's when the oven door slams shut, trapping him inside. Suddenly, the inside bursts into flames, and Obi quickly finds himself seconds away from burning to death. The others start trying to open the door while Obi desperately attempts to break out through a small window at the other end, but it's locked, and the handle is too hot for anyone to get a strong enough grip. Looking up, he sees a small valve with a drawing of the devil pointing towards it and the word twist, but the fire is already too much for him to reach. Jonas tries to use his jacket to get the door open, but it doesn't work, leaving the window as his only chance to escape. Xavier grabs the spiked bat and finally manages to shatter the glass, but it's too late, and Obi manages to make it halfway through before burning to death just inches from safety, the syringes melting in the fire along with him. That makes 3 victims down, with 7 more to go. While the others start to panic, Amanda here calmly grabs a shovel and quietly heads back upstairs. Okay. Obi here just got roasted, and he's not the only one that's feeling the heat. By now, they should all be well aware that every one of Jigsaw's puzzles is hiding some sort of deadly twist. So before trying to find a solution, the most important thing is to carefully think the challenge through. Instead of climbing straight into the death trap, Obi should have started by taking a careful look around and inside of the device. If he'd taken a minute to think about what he was getting himself into, then he might have figured out that it was some sort of oven. Logically, it's going to need gas to start a flame, so the first thing to try would be finding a way to turn off the gas from the outside. By taking a moment to peek in first, Obi would have noticed the needles dangling on the opposite end, meaning that he'd have to be completely inside to reach them. He'd also see the valve that says twist, the small window at the other side, and possibly anything suspicious about the door that he'd have to crawl through. Once he'd thoroughly checked the device out, that's when it would be time to take some action. For starters, I'd be breaking the glass window to see if I could reach through it and grab the needles from the other end without ever having to put my whole body inside of the trap. Or possibly use whatever I could to find in the room to create an improvised tool to pull the needles out that way. If that didn't work, and he had no other choice but to go in, then he could have listened to Jigsaw's hint
Only the devil can help you out.
and tried turning the valve before reaching for the needles, which would hopefully have shut off the gas and stopped him from being burned alive. Also, it'd be smart to find something in the room that he could use to block the door from shutting, and have the others do their best to hold it open for a little extra insurance. At the very end, when he knew that he wasn't getting out, he could have at least still passed the 2 syringes through, which would have saved 2 lives and had given him the chance to die a hero. Instead, he panicked and let them both melt. So maybe this is just what he deserved after all. Back at the factory, John explains how finding out about his illness was the moment that he truly began to appreciate being alive. He'd tried to crash his car as a way to end his suffering. He ended up surviving the accident, and from that point on, decided to start testing others to teach them the value of life. Meanwhile, Laura begins to pass out as the nerve agent's hold on her becomes stronger, with Daniel doing his best to keep her awake and fighting, while Amanda searches around the room for any clues. Daniel asks her why she was chosen the first time, and she explains that it was because she was hooked on illegal substances. Although she managed to survive, she quickly fell back into bad habits, and Jigsaw must have decided that she hadn't truly learned her lesson. Although she was arrested for possession, insinuating that the officer who arrested her falsified the evidence to get a conviction. Trying to relate, Daniel almost admits that his father is a detective, but realizing that the others finding this out could put him in danger, he catches himself before he reveals too much. Just then, Jonas shows up and tells them that they found an unlocked door upstairs. Forcing it open, Xavier accidentally trips a wire, activating a digital clock that's built into a heavy metal door. The others follow him in, and while they're searching around, Jonas finds a note with Xavier's name on it, playing the tape. They listen as Jigsaw explains that the key to the door is buried somewhere in a pit of used needles in the center of the room, and if they don't find it before the timer runs out, then the door will be locked forever. With only 2 minutes remaining, Xavier panics and grabs Amanda, tossing her into the pit instead and shouting at her to find the key. Screaming in pain, she desperately digs through the pile while the needles stab her all over her body. Finally, she finds the key and throws it up to Xavier. Just as he goes for the keyhole, the timer runs out and the lock slams shut. Xavier storms out of the room, saying that he's done working with the group and is going to find a way out for himself. Okay. This guy Xavier just exposed himself as being the most dangerous one in the group, and I think that it might be time to vote him off the island, if you know what I mean. Because if anyone's gonna be using people as meat shields, it's gonna be me. Right from the beginning, he messed up their chances here by rushing into the room without carefully observing his surroundings. If he had just looked up, then he would have seen that the door was rigged with a wire. From there, the next thing to do would be to see if he could have reached up and deactivated the trap, or sent one of the smaller members of the group like Daniel or Laura inside to try to unscrew the little eye hook that's holding it all together without tripping the wire and activating the countdown for the lock on the other door. If they could get inside without triggering the hammer, then they'd have all the time that they needed to come up with a careful solution to find the key. Since nobody's going to want to dig around in a pit full of needles without some protection, they could have used the thick bed sheets that were originally covering up the hole to wrap around one person's legs and arms, and then lower them down slowly to avoid being jabbed. There's also some furniture and that creepy old stroller in the room, which they could have used as tools to safely dig around. Once the countdown began, with so many needles to search through, and so little time to do it, there was pretty much no chance that they'd find the key in time anyway. Still, this doesn't mean that they couldn't try making their own door. Even with the exit locked, they should use whatever tools that they have, like the spiked bat, shovel from the basement, and anything else that they can find to attack the walls, windows, floors, or even the ceiling. Anywhere that might be weak enough for them to punch through and create their own path forward. Meanwhile, the detectives start to worry that time is running out and try to come up with a plan for what to do next. That's when Allison suggests that they threaten to destroy the evidence of John's work, thereby taking away the notoriety and chance to live on through his legacy that he seems to be after. Going back over to John, Eric starts tearing up the evidence right in front of him, but John tells him that it really doesn't matter, because doing this won't save his son. Just then, John reveals that he has one more trick up his sleeve, telling the detective to search one of the drawers in the monitor room to see what he's talking about. Inside, the detectives find a folder full of the arrest records for each of the hostages in the house, revealing that Eric was the arresting officer in each case, and planted false evidence to get all of them convicted. Now, it's even more important for him to act fast, because if the others were to find out that Daniel is his son, then they might kill him before the nerve gas ever has a chance. Xavier makes his way back up to the first room with the safe, accidentally moving the coat that they were using to cover up Gus's body. That's when he remembers that, according to Jigsaw, the combination is in the back of their minds, and pulls down the man's collar, revealing the number 2. Jonas steps in the room, starting to vomit up blood, and tells Xavier that they should work together, but he says that he's going to finish this on his own. Standing up, he pulls out a knife and orders Jonas to turn around. Jonas decides that it's time to fight back, and in the struggle, they both fall to the floor, with Jonas kicking Xavier hard in the face. Although he manages to get the upper hand, the nerve agent starts to take full effect. Xavier rushes for the spiked bat, swinging it into the back of Jonas's skull. He staggers forward and collapses to the floor, dead. That makes 4 victims down, with 6 more to go. Xavier finds the number 16 tattooed on the back of his neck. As the others continue searching the house, Laura collapses from the exposure to the gas. But from her position on the floor, she notices a picture frame hung up on the wall with the glass broken in the shape of an X, saying that this must be the X marks the spot. Turning the picture around, Addison finds a hidden photo of Eric and Daniel together and realizes that the boy's father is the officer who put them all away. Just then, Laura starts to violently convulse until she finally dies in Amanda's arms. That makes 5 victims down, with 5 more to go. No longer able to trust anyone, Addison decides to go off on her own, leaving Daniel and Amanda alone in the hallway, which is when they hear Xavier searching for them somewhere else in the house. While Xavier goes down into the basement and finds the number 11 written on Opie, Amanda goes back into the safe room and discovers Jonas's dead body, realizing that Xavier must have been his killer. Upstairs, he finds Laura's body next, this time seeing that her number was 8, before discovering the photo of Daniel and his dad. As Amanda grabs the kid and they try to escape, they nearly end up crashing right into Xavier and run for their lives as he chases after them with the knife. No longer able to sit back and watch as his son is in danger, Eric grabs his weapons and attacks John, throwing him around the room and demanding to know what he's done with the kid. John only taunts him that it won't be long until his son is dead, so Eric breaks one of the man's fingers before slamming him to the ground and threatening to shoot him if he doesn't give in. Finally, John agrees to take him to the house, on the sole condition that nobody else is allowed to follow. Before the others even have a chance to notice, Eric loads John into the van and speeds off towards the house. The officers get a lock on the signal for the source of the camera feed, and the SWAT team rushes to the location. Addison here wanders into an unlocked room, where she finds a syringe of antidote placed inside of a clear glass box above her head. There's another envelope with a cassette tape, but she throws it away and immediately sticks her arm into the box. Grabbing the syringe, she tries to lift it out, but only ends up pulling it apart. Sticking her other arm in, she realizes that the holes are covered up with sharp, angled metal, leaving her trapped with no way to escape. Xavier hears her screaming for help, but instead of trying to set her free, he only looks at the number 9 on the back of her neck before leaving her there to die. That makes 6 victims down, with 4 more to go. Okay, this one was just embarrassing. Addison here didn't even try listening to the tape, and if there's one thing that she should have learned by now, it's that you always listen to the tape. I get that she's in a hurry, but really, how long could it have taken to go back, find Jonas, and get the tape player? That way, she would have at least had a hint about what she was up against. As with all of these tests, the thing to do here is to carefully observe the trap first, and in this case, think outside of the box. Literally. Before just sticking her hands in there, she should have tried breaking the cage in some way first, either by shattering the glass or by busting the whole pane right out of the frame if it turned out to be shatterproof. There seems to be plenty of thick pieces of wood right here in the corner of the room that look like they'd be great for doing some smashing. If that didn't work, then she could have taken one of those same boards and pushed it through the hole first, opening up the trap and allowing her to safely slip her hand inside to carefully grab the syringe without getting cut. As Amanda and Daniel take cover in the safe room, Xavier shows up and starts trying to break his way inside. While Daniel holds him off, Amanda grabs the spiked bat and slams it into the floorboards, using it as a bar to jam the door shut. Looking back towards the safe, she realizes from the pool of Jonas's blood that there's a trap door hidden underneath it, and calls Daniel over to help her push it clear. Although they managed to move the safe, they end up finding out that the door is locked, which is when Daniel remembers that Jonas should still have the key in his pocket. Luckily, it works, and they slip down through the door just as Xavier finally breaks in. Eric arrives outside of the building, and John gives him a key, saying that he'll need it to get in. Searching the house, he finds the photo of him and Daniel. While he sweeps the upper floors, the SWAT team busts in through the front door, but Allison points out that she can't see any of them on the cameras. That's when they find a room full of monitors and realize that not only were the cameras never live, but Jigsaw led the SWAT team to an entirely different house. Now running for their lives, Amanda and Daniel end up walking straight into the bathroom where Jigsaw played his very first game, with the bloody hacksaw lying on the floor. Xavier finally catches up with them and finds Daniel passed out with Amanda looking like she's not doing much better. He tells them that all he wants is the number on the back of their necks, but she points out that he still doesn't know his own, and he won't be able to get it if she doesn't tell him. Xavier tries looking in a nearby mirror, but it's too dirty, so he realizes that he only has one choice left. He slices the chunk of skin from the back of his neck, and moving towards the others to finally finish the job. Daniel suddenly jumps up and slashing his throat with the hacksaw. That makes 7 victims down, with 3 more to go. Following their trail, Eric comes to the bathroom and finds Xavier's dead body, but Amanda and his son are nowhere in sight. That's when he sees what looks like a body laying in a bathtub, but when he leans in to investigate, the person springs towards him and jabs a syringe into his leg. Back at the warehouse, the death timer runs out, and a safe on the other side of the room swings open, revealing Daniel trapped inside but still alive. If Eric listened to John, then he would have found his son safe and sound, but now he's about to end up the most recent victim in the next of Jigsaw's games. Okay. Jigsaw just played this guy here like a fiddle. This whole time he thought that he was the one in control, but I think by now it's safe to say, Eric, you f***ed up. They say that what goes around comes around, and boy, are you about to learn that the hard way. It wasn't even Jigsaw himself who started your downward spiral, although it looks like he's about to finish it. No, the hard truth is that the only person you have to blame for the position that you're in right now is yourself. You might have thought that you could get away with falsifying evidence to get convictions, but a badge can't protect you from karma forever. The rules were simple. All that you needed to do was listen to what Jigsaw had to say, and you would have found your son safe and sound, just like he promised. Instead, you let your hot-headed ways take over once again, and sure enough, you ended up walking right into his trap. I guess this is what you get for locking up so many innocent people. And now it's your turn to find out what it's like to be on the other side of the bars. If Daniel wasn't disappointed with you enough already, then he sure is going to be now. Because if this is how you planned on trying to save him, then he never would have had a chance. When all that you needed to do was go 2 hours without beating up an old man and you still somehow managed to blow it, Eric, you f***ed up. Eric wakes up on the bathroom floor, finding a tape player lying there on the ground. He hears Amanda's voice talking to him, saying how she wants revenge for how he ruined her life. After surviving Jigsaw's game the first time around, she decided to take him on as a new mentor and promised to carry on his legacy after his death. She leaves Eric trapped alone in the darkness, while John smiles from his place out in the van. That makes 8 victims down, with 1 survivor and a new Jigsaw on the loose. And now, Eric's real game can finally begin. If you had to complete a series of 3 deadly trials to get revenge for someone you love, what would you do? There's new contestants on the chopping block, but this time, there's more to winning than just survival. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the death maze of revenge in Saw 3. Jigsaw wants to play another game, but his new apprentice is about to break all of the rules. After failing his game, Eric Matthews suddenly wakes up on the floor in the middle of a pitch-dark room, with nothing but a flashlight and his service weapon lying just out of arm's reach. As he tries to grab them, he realizes that he isn't able to move, so he takes off his shoe and uses it to pull the weapon closer. Unfortunately, the magazine is empty. Throwing it aside, he manages to get a hold of the flashlight instead, only to find out that his ankle is chained to a nearby pipe. The detective's first instinct is to start kicking as hard as he can, but no matter how hard he struggles, the pipe itself won't budge, which is when he notices a rusty hacksaw that was clearly left there for him to find. Grabbing it, he desperately begins trying to saw through the chain, but quickly realizes that it's no use, leaving him with only one other option. Across the room, he spots the chained up severed foot of one of the previous victims, and suddenly understands what Jigsaw wants him to do. Nervous, he holds the saw up to his ankle and prepares to get to work, but can't bring himself to do it. So he grabs the cover from the back of a toilet and slams it down on his foot as hard as he can, until he's finally able to completely snap his ankle, giving him the leverage that he needs to slip out of the cuff. Okay, this guy just gave snapping out of it a whole new meaning. It's hard to argue with the results here, but with that being said, his escape strategy could use a bit of work. For fans of the Saw films, this trap should be painfully familiar, but would you really need to sacrifice a foot to escape? The truth is that Eric here gave up on sawing through the chain way too quickly. Just because some other dummy got desperate and decided to cut his own foot off doesn't mean that he should have immediately jumped to that same conclusion. All he needed to do here was hold the chain steady, lean into the cut with his body weight, and eventually keep working it until eventually he got through. Without water, he'd still have a good 3 days to survive down there, and even longer if he could find some type of water source, like condensation from the nearby pipes. But without a foot, he'd likely die from blood loss in as quickly as 3 minutes if he didn't get some immediate medical attention. This is actually one of the few traps in the series that can be beaten without taking a serious injury, but unfortunately, the next players in Jigsaw's game aren't going to be so lucky. Of course, we know from the last movie that the only reason Eric was in a major rush here was because he was trying to save his kidnapped son. But for anyone else, there'd be no immediate danger besides eventually dying of dehydration, which gives you plenty of time to think up an exit strategy that doesn't involve any on-the-spot amputations. Plus, the longer that he's down there, the more time there is for help to arrive. There's no way to know if anyone's coming, of course, but it sure would suck to go through all of the trouble of sawing off a foot, or even smashing your own ankle, only to find out that rescue was on the way. When considering all of the possibilities, the best thing to do here would be to keep trying to cut through the chain until you were absolutely sure that it wasn't going to work. Now, let's say that this saw was too dull to cut through. This is when the toilet tank lid becomes the next best solution. Before turning it on his foot, it might have been smarter to try striking at the pipe that he was kicking when he first woke up, hitting the chain where it connected to either the pipe or his ankle cuff, or seeing if he could damage the cuff itself. Snapping his ankle definitely would have gotten the job done, but if it were me, I'd only want to resort to that after I tried every other possibility. Several months later, a team of police officers uses a torch to slice their way through a sealed metal door into an abandoned classroom where they find another one of the maniac's recent victims. Detective Allison Carey quickly arrives on the scene, nervous that it might be Eric, but finding out that it isn't him doesn't make what she's seeing any less shocking. Scattered around the room are pieces of what's left of a man who was held in place by chains before violently blown to bits. It turns out that the victim's name was Troy, and Jigsaw chose him because he had squandered the advantages that he was given in life, and instead chose to become a repeat criminal, spending most of his life in prison. He was chained to the floor and ceiling by several hooks piercing through the skin all over his body, and given only 90 seconds to set himself free before a makeshift bomb would explode. Desperate to escape, He began ripping out the chains, one after another, until only one left was hooked through his lower jaw. But for all his efforts, he was too slow and the bomb exploded, blowing him to pieces. That makes one victim down, with 8 more to go. Carrie still can't get Eric off of her mind, but the other officers say that the most important thing to focus on right now is finding the killer. The team is confused at how Jigsaw could have rigged up this trap in the first place, since he was practically dead the last time that they saw him. Which is when Carrie says that she doesn't think that it was him at all. She argues that although his traps aren't exactly fair, he always leaves the victim a legitimate way to escape. But in this case, the door was sealed shut, meaning that even if Troy had gotten free in time, he would have died either way. Okay, this was just unfair. The game was specifically designed to be unwinnable, and Troy here was dead the instant that that bomb started to count down. The only chance that he could have possibly had at survival would have been to somehow neutralize the explosives, and hope that someone eventually came along to break him out. Since his time was limited, he could have tried to tear out only the chains that were necessary to allow him to get close to the bomb, and then, after quickly observing the electronics, made his best guess as to what wire he could tear out to hopefully disarm it. Whether he gets it right or not, if he just sits there and does nothing, then he's dead either way. So giving it a try and hoping for the best really couldn't make the situation much worse for him here. Alternatively, it seems like the explosive charge itself was relatively small, with most of the damage coming from the shrapnel inside of the jar. With this in mind, he could have tried placing the bomb inside one of the desks to hopefully contain and redirect some of the power from the explosion, or tossed the thing next to the doors or windows and taken cover behind one of the desks, and the explosion would open up an escape route. Unfortunately, there was really no clean way out of this one, and poor Troy here was pretty much doomed from the start. That night, while washing up back at her apartment, Carrie sees a vision of Eric reflected in the bathroom mirror. Still obsessing over the case, she sits on her bed watching the Jigsaw tape, surrounded by evidence files from previous investigations. Just then, she notices something strange. At the end of the tape, it cuts into a live feed, and somehow it seems to be coming from the closet in her own bedroom. Acting quickly, she grabs her handgun from her nightstand and fires 4 shots straight through the closet door before going to check it out. Suddenly, someone wearing a pig mask appears in the room standing right behind her and instantly knocks her out. When she finally wakes up, she realizes that she's been taken into an abandoned building and is now in the middle of one of Jigsaw's traps herself. From a screen on the other side of the room, the puppet explains that she's attached to a device that's hooked into her ribcage. The key to unlock this device is sitting at the bottom of a jar of acid that's dangling right in front of her, and she'll have only 1 minute to retrieve it before she's torn apart. Horrified, she slams her hand into the jar, screaming with pain as the acid dissolves her skin, but finally manages to grab the key. With her hands shaking, Carrie desperately opens the padlock, only to realize that it was all a trick. Just like the last trap, this is the one that she was never meant to escape. The real killer steps into the room, revealing themselves to Carrie just before the end, when suddenly the trap activates, tearing open Carrie's chest and brutally killing her. That makes 2 victims down, with 7 more to go. Meanwhile, this ER doctor Lynn manages to save the life of a child who was gravely injured in a car accident, although her coworkers notice that lately she hasn't been herself. In truth, she's been struggling with problems in her family life, as well as a dependency on prescription medication. At the end of her shift, she goes to the locker room and gathers her things, only to discover that she's been locked inside. When no one answers her calls for help, she decides to try reaching someone on her cell phone, but suddenly, the pig mask-wearing attacker lunges at her from the shadows, knocking her out and taking her away. Sometime later, she wakes up tied to a chair in the middle of a horrifying workshop, and the kidnapper reveals herself to be Amanda Young, one of Jigsaw's former victims who survived her test and eventually became his apprentice. Wheeling her into the next room, Amanda brings Lynn face to face with John Kramer himself. He explains that her hospital was where he received his fatal diagnosis, and calls her out for not appreciating the advantages that she was given in life, before telling her that he wants to play a game. That's when Amanda straps a metal collar around her neck that's holding 5 shotgun shells pointed straight at her head. The collar is linked to John's heart rate monitor, and if he dies or she tries to go out of range, it will trigger the shells, killing her instantly. Somewhere else, another victim is about to go through a series of tests. Amanda here has the only key, and if Lynn can keep John alive until the other victim completes his tests, then she'll also be free to go. Okay, Lynn may be in a tough spot, but the sad truth is that she made capturing her way too easy for Amanda here. Right up until they actually put the collar on her, Lynn wasn't in any immediate danger. Plus, they clearly need her alive to take care of John, so they might not have been willing to outright kill her if she had at least tried to fight back. As soon as she woke up, before even figuring out where she was or what was going on, the first thing that Lynn should have done was immediately start trying to set herself free. Since the only thing holding her in place were a few loosely tied ropes, if it were me, I would have quickly began moving my wrists back and forth to try and create enough space to slip my hands out, and then waited for the opportunity to start fighting back with everything that I had. Once they put that collar on her neck, it was pretty much game over, so the key would have been to try to put the beat down on Amanda here before she even had the chance to lock her in. Since John's on the brink of death, he wouldn't have been able to help his friend once the tussle started, so she's never going to get a better chance to make her play than she had right when she first woke up. Is it risky? Absolutely, but personally, I'd rather go down fighting now than wait to see whatever else these freaks have in store. Meanwhile, Lynn's estranged husband, Jeff, wakes up trapped in a wooden crate somewhere in an abandoned meatpacking plant. Looking around, he finds a tape player in there with him, and Jigsaw explains that he's been chosen because of his obsession with revenge against a drunk driver who killed his son and received only a short sentence. He's about to face several challenges offering him the chance to choose either revenge or forgiveness, with the final test being a confrontation with his son's killer if he can make it all the way through. Throwing his body weight against the sides of the container, he finally manages to knock it down from the forklift where it was suspended, busting open the crate and setting himself free. Jeff has a flashback of him standing in his son's bedroom and preparing to confront the child's killer. After a few glasses of booze, he notices that one of the kid's stuffed animals is missing and storms into his daughter's room where he catches her sleeping with it. Furious, he tells her never to touch things from the boys' rooms again, showing that he's still extremely attached to his son's possessions. Back in the room, he returns the boy's shirt to the closet when suddenly, Amanda bursts out from behind it and kidnaps him. Back in the abandoned building, Jeff picks himself up and begins to look around. On a table nearby, he finds a note that reads, "Open the door, Jeff," along with a picture of himself that's been torn out from a more complete photo, as well as a single small key. At the workshop, Amanda alternates between keeping track of Jeff's progress and watching Lynn work. The doctor starts off by running some tests to evaluate John's condition, and Amanda steps in to let him know that the game has begun. Trying to reason with her, Lynn says that they need to take John to the hospital if he's going to survive, but Amanda grabs her by the side of the head and explains that they brought her there for a reason. Going to the hospital isn't an option, but without the proper medication and equipment, Lynn argues that he'll never make it. That's when John speaks up, telling Amanda that the woman can't do her job if she continues threatening her, and reminding her to play by the rules. Suddenly, his heart rate spikes, and he begins to vomit as he slips into a full-blown seizure. Lynn immediately jumps into action, holding him still and shouting at Amanda to keep the oxygen mask over his face. Panicking, she searches the room for any seizure medication, but without it, there's nothing that they can do. Luckily, the seizure subsides and John's condition stabilizes. Although Amanda is clearly shaken up by the whole event, Lynn asks Amanda if she's ready to take him to the hospital yet, explaining that John needs an operation to relieve the pressure from his brain. She agrees to the procedure, but insists that they have to do it in the workshop, saying that she'll find Lynn wherever she needs to get it done. Okay, the situation might look bad for Lynn here, but what Amanda doesn't realize is this actually gives her a perfect opportunity to escape. With John on his deathbed, the only real threats in the room are Amanda herself and the trap collar that's locked around her neck. Since Amanda is holding the key, if Lynn can find a way to disable her and take it without setting off any alarms, then she'll pretty much be home free. As a part of the materials that she's about to order, Lynn should request several doses of highly potent sedatives. To Amanda, this shouldn't come off as suspicious, because for all she knows, they're an important part of the procedure. In reality, she'll be bringing Lynn everything that she needs to make her escape. With the sedatives all secured, all that Lynn would need to do is lure Amanda out of John's sight before finding an opportunity to hit her with a heavy dose to silently knock her unconscious, grab the key, and get the hell out of there before anyone knew what she was up to. Even if she's locked inside, with the collar off, there's nothing stopping her from grabbing one of the dozens of weapons that's lying around the place, taking out her two captors, and then having all of the time that she needs to come up with a way to get out. Searching through the building, Jeff eventually makes his way to a large freezer door marked with the words, "Face your fears." Inside, he finds a woman hanging from a chain, and the door immediately slams shut behind him. The woman wakes up and starts begging him to spare her life, barely able to get a word out due to the freezing cold. Jeff notices a padlock attached to the chains, but the key that he found isn't the right fit. He spots another lock on a door nearby, only to find out that his key doesn't match with that one either, and that's when he notices a tape player placed in the corner of the room. He listens as Jigsaw explains that this is going to be his first test. The woman in front of him was the only witness at the scene of his son's death, but she was too self-absorbed to help out or testify against the killer. There's a key placed behind a stack of freezing cold pipes which will unlock the door, and can also be used to free the woman if he chooses to forgive her. Suddenly, several hoses turn on, covering the woman with freezing cold water as she starts to scream in pain, before shutting it off again and giving them a chance to talk. Jeff only listens as the woman begs him to let her go. She explains that she didn't personally do anything to his son, but he argues that that's exactly why she deserves her fate. On the brink of death, the woman tearfully apologizes, saying that she's only human and made a mistake, which finally convinces Jeff to set her free. As the water turns back on, he wraps his arm in his shirt sleeve to protect himself from the cold pipes, but the key is hanging just out of reach. By now, the woman is completely frozen solid, but there's a chance that she might still be alive. Jeff leans as close as he can to the pipes, burning the side of his face on the cold metal. Finally, he grabs the key, although he loses some skin from his cheek. Rushing back over to the woman, he reaches up for the padlock, only to realize that it's completely frozen over, leaving him with no way to save her. That makes 3 victims down, with 6 more to go. Okay, if Jeff here was really going to save this woman, then he sure wasted a lot of time giving her the old cold shoulder. Going forward, he should make a general decision about whether he's going to save the victim or let them die, if for no other reason than to streamline the process. Now, there are some pros to letting Jigsaw's traps take their course here, one of which being that Jeff would get his long-awaited revenge, but also because it keeps things simple and removes the chance of the other person deciding to turn against him at some point later on. Personally though, I'd choose to save everyone that I could, since having a team of grateful allies could help out in the future tests, and, more importantly, I'd have someone to use as a meat shield if things ended up taking a turn for the worse. To save the woman's life, the first thing that Jeff should have done was to grab onto the water hoses and use his body weight to try and rip them down one at a time. They don't look very strong, and if he could manage to disable them, then that would buy him some more time to reach the key and unlock her restraints. When it comes to going for the key itself, Jeff made a wise move by using his shirt sleeve to protect himself from the freezing pipes. What he failed to do though was think the scenario all the way through. Since the key was just out of reach, he ended up needing to get so close to the pipes that he burned some of the skin off of the side of his face. The thing is, he's actually wearing several layers of clothing, so by simply taking one of them off and using it to protect his face, he could have reached the key without causing himself any harm at all. Although he managed to get out, he's gonna have to start thinking more creatively if he wants to get through the next challenges clean and get the good ending. Out in the hallway, Jeff finds another note that reads, "One bullet will end it all," along with a picture of his son cut out from the same larger photograph. And a single handgun round back at the workshop. Lynn starts looking around while Amanda is gone, trying to come up with a plan to escape. Just then, Amanda appears behind her, saying that she knows exactly what she was up to. Instead of retaliating, she simply hands Lynn an axe, giving her an open shot to kill her, but explaining every reason why doing so would be a horrible idea. Lynn can only stand there while Amanda takes back the axe and tells her that she has what they'll need for John's operation. Going to his bedside, Amanda tearfully updates John on Jeff's progress, saying that he's made it past the first test. He's clearly not doing well and tells her that there's some things that he needs her to do, explaining that she'll find an envelope with her instructions in the middle drawer of his desk. With the procedure about to begin, Amanda admits that she's terrified of losing him, but he reassures her that everything is going according to plan. Meanwhile, Jeff rounds the corner into a hallway where he finds a recreation of the scene of his son's death. The puppet laughs at him when he picks it up, making him extremely angry, and he sees another door ahead marked with the words, "Time to let go." Pushing his way inside, he accidentally activates the trap, and the door slams shut behind him once again. Just then, he hears a man calling out for help somewhere in the room. Climbing a ladder to the second level, he finds another tape player hanging from a chain, and the man in question at the bottom of a huge vat. He's looking at Judge Halden, the man who let his son's killer off with an incredibly light sentence. The key for the exit and to set the judge free is hidden somewhere within his son's possessions, but to find it, he'll have to make the decision to incinerate them all. The machinery in the room powers on, and the conveyor belt carrying rotten bodies of dead pigs begins dropping them into the meat grinder, with their liquefied guts being funneled into the vat, threatening to drown the judge in the revolting ooze. Jeff slowly thinks over his decision, asking the judge if he remembers what he did. The judge pleads with Jeff to save him and not to become a killer himself, adding that he has a son as well. Okay, Jeff here needs to act quickly before he loses another perfectly good meat shield to Jigsaw's trap. The pros and cons to saving the judge or letting him die are the same as the last test. So if it were me, I'd try to spare the man's life, but he's going to need to act fast. When Jeff entered the room, he accidentally pulled a pin out of the machine's control panel, which seems to have activated the trap. That pin should still be hanging near the wall attached to the wire. So the first thing that I'd try would be to see if I could get a hold of it and return it back to its original place, hopefully shutting down the conveyor. If that didn't work, then he could just try the brute force method of destroying the control panel itself to shut down the machine that way, or finding something like a metal rod to jam into the gears and bring it to a stop. Now, when it comes to the incinerator full of his son's things, it seems like the door is only secured with a padlock, meaning that if he could strike it hard enough with any blunt object that he could find, then he could probably force his way inside without having to turn on the flames. He'd still have to figure out exactly which of the kid's items the key was hidden in though, and might end up needing to destroy them in the process anyway. As it stands right now, the smartest decision would be to just close his eyes and quickly flip on the incinerator without allowing himself to overthink it. Unless he wants to be stuck there revengeless forever, he's gonna have to find that key to get out of the room regardless of what happens to the judge. So it's best to just get it over with as quickly as possible. That way he can hopefully save the man in time and have a potentially helpful ally, while also bringing himself that much closer to freedom and his son's killer. Taking his time, Jeff makes his way to the incinerator, but he can't bring himself to destroy the only physical connections that he has left to his son. Eventually, the judge stops screaming. Jeff reluctantly activates the incinerator and watches as his son's things are turned to ashes before his very eyes. The key falls out, and he rushes back to the vat, where he finds the judge only seconds away from drowning in the guts. Jeff unlocks the chain and pulls him up just in time. Back at the workshop, Lynn prepares everything that she'll need for John's operation, and Amanda shows up to give him another update on Jeff's progress. Lynn explains that she has to cut away a part of John's skull to relieve the pressure on his brain. Although she can give him local anesthesia to help numb the pain, he'll have to remain fully alert through the duration of the procedure. First, she uses a scalpel to slice open and peel back the skin from the area, revealing the surface of his skull, and she tells John to keep his mouth closed, while she fires up a power drill and makes 4 holes in the bone. Lynn then picks up a circular saw and carefully cuts out a section of his skull one side at a time. Finally, the procedure is complete, but suddenly, John's heart rate begins to drop. Lynn does whatever she can to keep him alive, and Amanda goes into full-blown panic mode. Luckily, he manages to stabilize, but as he's coming to, he grabs Lynn's arm and tells her that he loves her, causing Amanda to storm out of the room. While Lynn's cleaning up after the surgery, Amanda comes in and gives old Johnny a big hug. Lynn chimes in that, since he's still in shock, John can't hear her. Furious, Amanda grabs her by the throat and is about to draw a pistol when suddenly John wakes up, ordering his minion to let the doctor go and telling her to leave the room. Once she's gone, he apologizes to Lynn for her behavior. Outside, Amanda has a flashback to the aftermath of the first game that she helped Jigsaw set up. One of the victims, a man named Adam, had survived the trial, but was left to die from his wounds in a dilapidated bathroom. Feeling guilty, Amanda returned to the room and promised to free him, although what she really meant was suffocating him to death with a plastic bag. This made her a murderer, which is strictly against Jigsaw's code. Meanwhile, Jeff and the judge arrive outside the door to the 3rd stage of his test, which is marked with the words, "Here's your chance." On a table nearby, he finds a note reading "One step closer to your revenge," along with a handgun magazine and a torn out picture of his daughter. The judge apologizes for what happened to his son, but also argues that vengeance won't solve anything. Still, Jeff kicks through the door, activating the final trap. Inside the room, he finds a man hooked up to a cross-like torture device with a tape player hanging from his neck. The man before him is the driver who struck and killed his son, and now's his chance to finally take his revenge, or forgive the man and set him free. The device is going to slowly twist his arms, feet, and neck, tearing him apart one limb at a time, unless Jeff retrieves a key that's placed at the end of a long glass box and tied to the trigger of a double-barreled shotgun. As soon as the tape is finished, the door that they come through slams shut, and a timer begins to count down from 1 minute as the machine jolts to life. Jeff only stands there and watches as the man's right arm is twisted until the bone snaps and tears through his skin. Trying to save him, the judge goes for the key himself but is too afraid to grab it. The man's left arm is next, snapping in the same way, but as his feet begins to twist, Jeff finally decides to spare his life. Moving over to the box, he quickly observes how it's set up before reaching in and pulling the key towards him as far as he can. Carefully, Jeff unlatches the hook and takes the key, but the moment that he lets go, the shotgun fires, tearing off the side of the judge's face and killing him. With only seconds left, he goes back over to the trap, but can't manage to find the place for the key in time, and the device snaps the man's neck while Jeff can't do anything else but watch. That makes 5 victims down, with 4 more to go. Okay, it looked like Jeff finally got what he wanted, but the revenge wasn't so sweet after all. You see, so far, he ended up trying to save both of the previous victims after taking some time to think it over. So if he knew in his heart that he would do the same even for his son's killer, then he really should have acted more quickly to get the key and rescue him. I mean, what's the point of waiting until the guy's arms and legs were completely broken and he was bleeding to death before springing into action? With that much damage done, he's essentially just a liability that Jeff would need to take care of while he was still trying to find his way out. If he was just gonna let him die, then just let him die. Don't wait until the last possible second before deciding to set him free. The way that he got the key from the trap was almost perfect, but once he realized that pulling the key towards him would put pressure on the trigger of the shotgun, he should have made sure that no one was in the line of fire before letting go. After all, I would have hated to have to go through all the trouble of saving the judge the first time around only for him to be turned into Two-Face, this close to the finish line. While Amanda watches this unfold from the cameras, John begins to ask Lynn questions about her personal life, explaining that it's in her best interest to keep him talking. She confesses that things haven't been going well with her husband, although now she says that she'd give anything to see him again. But John calls her out for playing a part in the failing relationship and not being there for her children. Grabbing his hand, Lynn begs him to let her go. Just then, Amanda walks in to give them a progress update, but John only tells her to beat it. Heartbroken, she goes into the next room and grabs a handgun before returning to John's bedside and telling him that Jeff has completed the third test. According to John, this means that Lynn is free to go, but Amanda refuses to remove the collar and honor her end of the deal. That's when he confronts her with the knowledge that she's been secretly killing off survivors of the game, including Eric, who had her falsely imprisoned and essentially caused the downward spiral that her life became. It turns out that Eric had managed to free himself before she left the abandoned building where he was being held. After hearing him coming down the hallway, Amanda first decided to hide and let him go, but he quickly discovered her and attacked her with a metal pipe. During the scuffle, she managed to kick Eric in his injured ankle, causing him to become stunned with pain and giving her a chance to escape. However, as she was walking away, he began mocking her, and in her rage, she turned back to finish the job. Although this broke the rules, John still chose to forgive her, giving her one final chance to prove that she could be his successor. Confused, she asks why this woman is so important to him, but John responds that she isn't important to him at all. However, she is incredibly important to Amanda herself, adding that this is her last chance to get things right. As he makes his way through the building, Jeff finds a final note with the words "last chance" and the matching handgun for the magazine and bullet that he picked up along the journey. Jeff steps into the workshop and calls out for his wife, but as she runs to him, Amanda fires a single shot into her back. Furious, Jeff raises his pistol and uses his only bullet to shoot Amanda in the neck. As she collapses to the floor, bleeding to death, John reveals that the test had actually been Amanda's all along. Because her games were unwinnable, her test subjects were really nothing more than murder victims. And so, he decided to give her one more opportunity to prove that she could play by the rules. While setting up this test, he deliberately left her in the dark about the couple's backstory, hoping that she'd do the right thing and set Lynn free when she won the game, which she ended up failing to do. Now, her game is finished, and Amanda falls to the ground, dead. That makes 6 victims down, with 3 more to go. Jeff raises his gun and points it at John, but the man argues that no amount of revenge will make things right. Laughing, he pulls the trigger, but the weapon is empty, and so he turns his attention back to his wife. John explains that he can have an ambulance arrive in 4 minutes to save the woman's life, but the only way that Jeff can help her is to resist his desire for revenge and forgive him. Jeff approaches his bedside and says that he forgives him, but suddenly raises a circular saw, using it to slit John's throat. Okay, these idiots both just made the worst possible decisions. When it comes to Jigsaw, his games may be twisted, but there's always a way to win if you just follow the damn rules. Well, it looks like these two are just the latest in a long line of degenerates who've had to learn this lesson the hard way. Amanda and Jeff, you f***ed up. Let's start with you first, Amanda. As Jigsaw's evil apprentice, you should have known better than anyone else how this was all supposed to work. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but back in that abandoned house with the needle pit a few months ago, were you not the one constantly reminding all of the other hostages that they'd only survive if you just play by the rules? Well, here you are, a bit older, but apparently none the wiser, thinking that you can take matters into your own hands and just run amok without facing any consequences. If there was one person who was guaranteed to catch on to what you were doing, it was John here. And when he did, how did you think that he was going to react? Killing your victims without ever giving them a chance to redeem themselves goes directly against everything that he stands for. So of course he was going to come up with some convoluted scheme to give you one last shot at redemption. Unfortunately for everyone involved, it looks like you failed miserably, and the worst part is that you're not alone. Which brings us to you, Jeff. Talk about making the absolute worst decision possible right when it mattered the most. I mean, seriously, man, just read the room. Your wife's just been shot in the back, and John here is telling you that he can have an ambulance on the way to save her life if only you'd spare his own. That's not to mention the horrifying death device that's still strapped around her neck. If anything else, it might be a wise decision to at least ask him what's up with that before making any rash decisions. Plus, every test so far has centered around the theme of forgiveness. And when you've failed to let things go, someone died. Looking around the room, your wife is clearly the only person left who could suffer if you make the wrong decision here, so chances are pretty damn high that failing this last test will result in her losing her life. This is what you call a no-brainer. You should have listened to John and just forgave him. But you blew it right at the very end, and you're about to find out that even in death, Jigsaw still has a few tricks up his sleeve. In an instant, the door to the room slams shut, trapping him inside, while John's heart rate monitor flatlines, activating the collar around Lynn's neck and blowing her head to pieces. That makes 8 victims down, with 1 survivor, but the game isn't over yet. With his dying breath, John activates a tape player, explaining to Jeff he was his final test, and by killing him, he failed. While Jeff was trapped, John captured his daughter and was the only person who knew where he could find her. The girl is trapped somewhere with only a limited amount of air to survive. And if Jeff wants to find her before it's too late, you guessed it, he'll have to play another game. Saw 2004. It's the best film in the whole franchise. The one that jumped off this whole death game phenomenon. I remember going to Walmart in 2004 after seeing it in the theater just so I could watch the deleted scenes on the DVD, and like picking up the DVD, I was just like, wow, this fucking movie's amazing. I couldn't get my parents to watch it because they're bitches, and they never had torture porn back in the 70s. They just couldn't fathom that horror movies would go this way. James Wan, brilliant. It just goes to show what you can do when you got a limited budget and extreme creativity. Saw 1, I with you heavy, but let me know down in the comments what you thought. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out that How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. I'm the guy. I'll see you in the next video, and have a damn good day.